My name is Karen Marino. I'm 29 years old, and this story begins on what was supposed to be my birthday, brunch, a small gathering. I planned myself the kind I'd hoped would remind my family that I existed outside of the role I'd always played. The responsible one, the fixer, the quiet glue, holding everything together. I chose a little downtown restaurant my mother used to adore before she declared everything too modern. I made the reservation 2 weeks in advance, picked the table by the window, and sent a group message to Mom, Dad, my younger sister Claire, and my Aunt Linda. They all replied they would be there. Mom even added a smiley face, which for her was practically a love letter. It was enough to give me a hope I should have known better than to trust. I arrived early, as I always do. 15 minutes before any event is practically coded into my DNA, because when you're the dependable one, you get used to double-checking every detail so others don't have to. The restaurant felt warm and inviting, filled with the scent of citrus coffee and freshly baked bread. The table was already set for 5 white plates, neatly folded napkins, a slim vase of yellow tulips in the center. I stared at those tulips longer than I should have, letting myself believe for a moment that this year might truly be different. When the waiter asked if I'd like to start with coffee while I waited, I said yes, texted Mom that I had arrived, and settled in with the quiet excitement of someone who's been disappointed enough times to still try anyway. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 45. My phone remained stubbornly silent, except for one flicker of a typing bubble from Claire that disappeared without sending anything. The waiter glanced over periodically with that soft, hesitant sympathy, usually reserved for people who've clearly been stood up. I forced a smile and told him they were just running late, even though the lie twisted in my stomach. After an hour, a text finally arrived from Mom. "We thought you'd understand. No explanation. No apology. Not even a follow-up message. Just that." I stared at it, trying to figure out what exactly I was supposed to understand. Before I could make sense of the message, my phone buzzed again. This time a Facebook notification. Aunt Linda had posted a picture of Claire standing outside a salon, her hair freshly cut styled, like she was walking out of a fashion editorial. She was smiling brightly, with one hand on her hip, glowing in the way only Claire could. The caption read, "Proud of our golden girl, always glowing inside and out." My stomach dropped. I scrolled through the comments, heart emojis, praise relatives I hadn't heard from in years, piling on compliments. Not one mention of my birthday brunch they had all promised to attend. I set my phone face down and stared at the tulips again. One of the petals had started curling inward. I felt laughter bubble up, quiet and humorless, because of course Claire's haircut would take precedence over my birthday. It always had been this way. Claire wasn't cruel, she simply walked through life assuming the world would rearrange itself for her, and my parents made sure it did. When she got her driver's license, Mom threw her a party. When I got mine, she said, "That's great, honey," and returned to folding laundry. When Claire got into college, the house was filled with celebration for a week. When I graduated top of my class, I received a text asking if I had eaten. 3 years ago, Claire called me crying because she couldn't afford her new car's monthly payment. She had impulsively leased a flashy red coupe, not because I need it, Karen, but because confidence matters, she'd said. Somehow, despite my better judgment, I ended up co-signing the lease. Claire made 4 payments before forgetting and then conveniently entering a cycle of being between jobs. Every time I brought it up, Mom said, "You know how she is. You're older, more responsible." So I paid it, month after month, quietly. But that morning, sitting alone at a table for 5, that history suddenly felt different. After 2 hours, I finally asked for the bill. The waiter hesitated before handing it to me, his voice soft as if afraid he might break some fragile part of me. The brunch setup, the birthday cake I never got to cut, everything totaled just under $600. I paid, left a decent tip, and walked out into the cold November air that stung like glass. Sitting in my car, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes weren't red from crying. They were red from the exhaustion of years of being overlooked. All I had wanted was a simple brunch. When I got home, the silence of my apartment felt overwhelming. I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and scrolled through Claire's salon photo again. Her smile was effortless, radiant, almost mocking. It hit me then with a clarity I couldn't ignore. Mom's text. "We thought you'd understand" wasn't an apology. It was a reminder that understanding them, accommodating them, sacrificing for them was something they expected from me without question. They believed that no matter what they did, I would absorb the hurt quietly. I opened my banking app and saw the monthly car payment had been deducted earlier that day. Another piece of responsibility I had been carrying alone. I remembered Claire's voice just a month earlier as she'd laughed through the phone and said, "Karen, you're my guardian angel." But I wasn't, not anymore. Something inside me went cold, steady, decisive. I logged into the leasing portal and canceled my cosign. Just a few forms, a confirmation email, and suddenly the financial tether I had held onto for 3 years snapped free. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel nervous. I felt calm. Then, carrying that same unshakable calm, I opened the family group chat and typed, "Claire can walk like I did." And I sent it. The next morning, when I woke up and checked my phone, I had 67 missed calls. And at that moment, I knew the storm I had tried so hard to avoid had finally begun. The morning after I sent that message felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I woke up without the immediate buzzing of responsibility tugging at me. No one needed a ride. No one needed money. No one needed emotional triage. I lay there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. It didn't last long. By 8 a.m., my phone started vibrating again. Call after call, name after name. Mom, Dad, Claire, Aunt Linda. Unknown numbers I suspected were them calling from different phones. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because something inside me had finally shifted. I was tired of explaining myself to people who never listened. Mom texted first. "Karen, what did you do? Claire is in tears." A minute later, "You cannot just abandon your sister like this. She depends on you." That was the part that made me pause. Depends. They said it like it was a natural law, like gravity or sunrise, as if her dependence was my responsibility instead of the result of years of being enabled. I set the phone down without responding. By noon, Dad called, and true to form, didn't text first. He went straight to voicemail. "Karen, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't how family behaves. You're punishing your sister for nothing. A misunderstanding. Be the bigger person." That phrase, "be the bigger person," had been thrown at me for so many years, it had lost all meaning. It really meant keep swallowing the hurt so we don't have to change. I ignored his call too. It wasn't until late afternoon that I finally picked up one of Mom's calls. Not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to hear how far she'd take it, how she would twist what happened to suit the narrative she preferred. The moment I answered, her voice burst through the speaker, cracked with indignation and false heartbreak. "Karen, how could you do something so cruel?" "Cruel?" I asked quietly. "You forgot my birthday brunch to go to a salon. You didn't even tell me." "That's not fair," she snapped. "Claire's appointment was important." "She's been feeling down about herself lately, and I didn't think you'd mind. You never care about that kind of thing." "That kind of thing? You mean my own birthday?" Mom exhaled sharply, the kind of sigh meant to make the other person feel unreasonable. "Oh, stop acting like we abandoned you. You're almost 30, Karen. Birthdays aren't a big deal anymore. Claire's been struggling. She needed this." "So it's not a big deal when it's me," I said, keeping my voice even. "But when Claire gets a haircut, it's a family event." "Don't be petty," Mom snapped. "You're better than this." Something inside me tightened at those words. "You're better than this" had always been her way of telling me to stay quiet, to shrink my feelings down until they were invisible. I wasn't better. I was tired. "You've been telling me that my whole life," I said softly. "Maybe you were wrong." There was a pause just long enough to tell me she heard the shift she never expected to hear. Then she went in for the kill. "You can't just cancel your cosign, Karen. Do you realize what kind of trouble you've caused the dealership called Claire this morning? They said if the payments lapse, the car might get repossessed. She's hysterical." Then maybe I said, still calm, "She shouldn't have bought a car she couldn't afford. Or maybe you could help her for once. You know we don't have money for that." "I didn't either," I said. "But I made it work for her. For 3 years." The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. Then Mom said something that confirmed everything I had tried to deny for years. "You've always been jealous of her." It didn't matter how rational I'd been, how calm, how factual. In her mind, everything boiled down to jealousy. That was her weapon, her explanation for why I dared to feel hurt, her excuse to dismiss every valid emotion I'd ever had. I didn't respond. I simply hung up. But the silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It was heavy simmering, shifting into something new. The next few days felt like walking through an emotional battlefield. Family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly emerged with opinions. My cousin texted, "Hey, not picking sides, but maybe you overreacted." Aunt Linda posted a passive-aggressive status online. Some people forget what family means when they think they're too good to help. The comments under it were full of sympathy. "You're the glue of the family. Some people are just selfish." I didn't even need to guess who they meant. Meanwhile, Claire flooded her Instagram story with vague quotes. "Some people want to see you fall because they can't climb." Learning who's real. Photos of her sitting in the car, my car payment mascara smeared, captioned, "Trying to stay strong." She wasn't the villain in her story, she was the victim. For a moment, I wondered if I should have simply stayed silent like always. But then something happened that pushed everything past the point of no return. A few days after the brunch disaster, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my apartment door. It was a rent notice showing my payment had been submitted twice, once by me, and once by an additional account holder. Confused, I checked my bank account and saw nearly half my savings had been withdrawn from the old family emergency fund account I'd set up years ago. I was the only one who still contributed to it, but Mom was technically a co-holder. I called the bank. They confirmed she'd authorized the transfer. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. "You weren't using it," she said flatly. "Claire needed help after what you did. It was a family emergency." "You stole my money," I said. "Stop being dramatic. You said it was for the family." "No," I whispered. "I said it was for emergencies, not consequences." Well, she snapped, "Maybe if you hadn't made such a spectacle, we wouldn't have needed to do this. Claire is humiliated. People are talking." Something inside me cracked, not loudly. Quietly, like a fault line shifting deep underground. "You crossed the line," I said. Mom laughed sharp bitter. "Oh, please. You've always thought you were better than us. Maybe this will remind you where you came from." I hung up without another word. And in that silence, something inside me hardened. That night, I sat at my laptop and dismantled every financial tie I had to them. Passwords changed, accounts unlinked, automatic payments canceled. Every door they had walked through to access my life closed. The next morning, the calls shifted from guilt to outrage. Dad left a furious voicemail calling me ungrateful. Aunt Linda texted, "You're breaking your mother's heart." Claire messaged me, "You ruined everything." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, for the first time, I allowed myself to think a forbidden word, enough. And just when I believed things couldn't escalate further, they did. The week after the explosion with my family should have felt liberating. I had finally cut the cord they'd been yanking on for years. I had separated my account, shut every door they used to step into my life without permission, and for the first time in a long time, the air around me felt breathable. But peace doesn't last long when the people you're walking away from have spent their entire lives depending on your silence. When they lose control, they don't surrender. They escalate. It started with a call from my manager. She rarely asked me to come into her office. She was one of those bosses who preferred emails and bullet points. So when she appeared at my desk with an uncomfortable expression and said, "Karen, can we talk?" my stomach pulled tight. She slid her phone across the desk without saying anything. On the screen was a screenshot of a private message that supposedly came from me. The message read, "I can't stand working here anymore. Everyone's so fake. I only stay because I need the paycheck." It was addressed to one of my coworkers. Underneath that was a second screenshot, this one calling my supervisor incompetent. My vision tunneled for a moment. "I didn't send these," I said immediately. "I know," my manager replied softly. "But HR still has to investigate." I sat there with my heart thudding in my chest, a heavy, sickening beat. My job was one of the few things in my life that remained stable, earned entirely by me, without anyone else's fingerprints on it. I had worked hard to be dependable, professional, respected, and now someone was trying to rip that out from under me, too. Only one person in my life had the motivation, the spite, and the immaturity to do something like this, Claire. And there, buried in the text of the fake messages, was her "tell a random" capital letter thrown in for emphasis. She always typed like she was trying to add dramatic flair to mundane sentences. It was subtle, but it was enough. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't accuse her. I knew better. I'd learned by now that confronting my family only gave them room to twist the narrative. Instead, I sat quietly in that chair, feeling something inside me shift for the second time in weeks. A quiet resolve took shape. If they wanted to drag me into war, they should have remembered who I was before they decided I'd always be the accommodating one. That evening, I went home and began gathering everything I could. Work logs, timestamps, Slack threads, copies of my activity history, every piece of digital evidence proving I wasn't online when those messages were supposedly sent. I organized it neatly, clearly, calmly. No anger, no emotion, just facts. It was the kind of preparation you do when you finally understand that someone is willing to burn you down if it keeps their world intact. While HR reviewed my documentation, I moved around the office like a ghost. People were polite, but I caught the occasional side glance, uncertainty, curiosity, the suspicion that follows any accusation, even one without evidence. I hated how it felt. Vulnerable, like I was waiting for the verdict of a crime I hadn't committed. Outside of work, my phone kept buzzing with messages from new numbers, fake accounts, anonymous texts, emails with thinly veiled accusations. The language was familiar. The emotional manipulation was familiar. The goal was familiar, make me unravel so they could say I was unstable, dramatic, ungrateful. I blocked every number. One afternoon, as I sat in the break room heating my lunch, my coworker Sasha approached me. She lowered her voice and said, "I just want you to know I don't believe those messages were from you. Whoever sent them doesn't know you at all." Her kindness softened something in me that had been pulled too tight for days. It reminded me that not everything in my life had turned poisonous. Some people knew my character without needing proof. Still, when I got home that night, the silence of my apartment felt heavier than usual. I sat on my couch surrounded by unopened mail and half-eaten takeout containers and wondered how my life had spiraled into this so quickly. How one boundary, one refusal to keep sacrificing myself had ignited a wildfire. A month ago, I had been the person everyone depended on. The daughter who handled emergencies, the sister who bailed others out, the woman who quietly kept the peace. Now I was the villain in a story they invented overnight. That night overwhelmed. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside without any destination in mind. The cold air hit my face like a slap, grounding me. I walked for an hour, maybe more, through quiet residential streets, past shuttered shops and flickering streetlights. My phone eventually died. The silence that followed was strangely soothing. For once, no one could reach me. No one could demand anything from me. When I finally returned home, something inside me cracked. I sat on the floor, leaned back against the couch, and let everything I'd been holding inside finally pour out. I cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not elegantly, not quietly, but with the raw, messy grief of someone realizing the people she had loved the most had never been capable of loving her the same way. I cried for every birthday forgotten, every sacrifice dismissed, every moment I forced myself to swallow hurt so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I cried until my voice broke, until the weight on my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe again. When the tears finally stopped, laughter quiet, and disbelieving escaped me. Not because anything was funny, but because there was a kind of clarity that comes from breaking open. At the bottom of all that hurt was a truth I had tried to avoid for years. I didn't owe them anything. Not my silence, not my money, not my emotional labor. I didn't owe them the rest of my life. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and an unfamiliar sense of resolve. I made a list of the first steps I needed to take, not for revenge, but for survival. Protect your peace. Rebuild your name. Don't go back. The first step was clearing my name at work. I sent HR a full report with neatly labeled evidence, a calm and professional summary of my online activity, and time-stamped logs proving the messages weren't mine. I expected skepticism. Instead, my manager called me in 2 days later with a soft smile. "You're officially cleared," she said. "The messages came from an unverified account. We're sorry you were put through this." Relief washed over me. But it wasn't just relief, it was confirmation. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't oversensitive. Someone really was trying to sabotage me, and I knew exactly who. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't message my mother. I didn't search for apologies I knew would never come. Instead, I let the realization settle deep inside me. They were willing to destroy my job just to punish me for refusing to be used. For the first time, I saw my family without illusions. And from that truth came the beginning of something new, something quiet and powerful. A version of myself they never expected to meet. Once HR cleared my name and the faint shadow over my reputation lifted something inside me, settled into a new, unfamiliar kind of calm. Not peace. Peace was still far out of reach, but a steadiness, a centered awareness of how far my family was willing to go and how far I was now prepared to protect myself. I didn't announce anything. I didn't argue with them. I didn't expose them. I simply went quiet, and the silence I learned was more powerful than anything I could have said. With my job secure again, I started making changes in small, deliberate steps. I stopped eating lunch at my desk and instead took walks outside, letting myself breathe in air that wasn't recycled office ventilation. I stopped staying late to finish other people's tasks. I started reading again at night. It felt strange at first, like wearing clothes that didn't belong to me, but slowly those habits became mine. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline my transformation, a recruiter contacted me about a hybrid creative role at a startup. Better pay, more flexibility, and a chance to actually build something for myself instead of holding together the pieces of other people's expectations. After 2 rounds of interviews, I got the offer. And for the first time in years, I felt like something genuinely good was happening for me, not because of what I could provide for others. I didn't tell a soul in my family, not my parents, not Claire, not even the aunt who occasionally played neutral mediator when it benefited her. Keeping the news to myself felt like reclaiming a locked room inside me that no one else was allowed to enter. With the signing bonus from the new job, I moved to a smaller, quieter apartment on the other side of the city. Nothing extravagant, just mine. I didn't give my new address to anyone from my family. The day I moved in, I sat on the floor among half-opened boxes and realized how light my chest felt. Silence had never felt comforting before, but here in a place untouched by years of emotional obligation, silence was freedom. Of course, silence only feels peaceful to the person who chooses it. To everyone else, it feels like loss or worse, defiance. So it didn't take long before my family began to panic about my absence. A month after I moved, my neighbor from the old building texted me, "Your mom is knocking on your old door shouting your name. Should I tell her you moved?" I stared at the message for a long time, imagining Mom standing in the hallway performing concern loudly enough for an imaginary audience. I told my neighbor not to say anything and thanked her for letting me know. That night, Mom left me a voicemail. "Karen, you can't disappear like this. We need to talk before things get worse." Before things get worse. The irony almost made me laugh. What more could they take? My time was gone. My money drained my boundaries. Bulldozed, my reputation nearly smeared at work. Worse for her simply meant losing access to me, my labor, my wallets, my silence. Still, curiosity is a dangerous thing. I checked Claire's social media. She had deleted several of her old posts and replaced them with new ones, photos of her smiling at events, showing off outfits, posing with friends. But her captions told another story. When people show you who they are, believe them, moving forward with or without support. It was all performative, polished, curated, to paint herself as the suffering heroine. But buried among the comments was one that caught my attention. "Hope things work out with your car situation. You deserve better. Elliot." I clicked the commenter's profile. He worked at a local auto financing company. My stomach tightened. Claire was doing what she always did, finding another rescuer, another source of help, another person to pick up the pieces she created. And judging by her latest posts, she had succeeded. A few days later, I received an email from the dealership confirming the car lease had officially been transferred out of my name. It should have been relieving, and it was until I noticed a detail at the bottom. The outstanding balance had been paid off in a lump sum. The payer was my father. And I knew instantly where the money had come from. The life insurance settlement he received after my grandfather passed away. Money he promised to save for genuine emergencies. Apparently Claire, convincing a financing agent to step in, qualified as one. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I felt tired. Watching from a distance made things clearer than they had ever been up close. My family wasn't malicious. They were simply used to a world where consequences were optional as long as I absorbed them. And the one time I refused, they treated it like betrayal. That realization didn't erase the hurt, but it freed me from carrying it. I threw myself into my new job, then into something I'd long forgotten, my own dreams. I began building a small design studio, something I once shelved, because Mom said it was unrealistic and too risky. I worked evenings and weekends building a portfolio, contacting clients, taking small projects. Each completed design felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had chipped away over years of leaning too heavily on me. Then, surprisingly, an international client found my work and reached out about a long-term contract. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. When I read the email, I sat motionless for nearly a minute, stunned, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from unfiltered pride. I accepted the contract that night and closed my laptop with a sense of calm I had never felt before. My life was finally expanding in ways that had nothing to do with saving other people. And just when everything was beginning to stabilize, when my world was finally mine, an unexpected message appeared on my screen. After months of blockade silence and carefully maintained distance, Claire's name popped up in my notifications. The preview read, "Please, Karen, I need your help. It's about Mom." My heart thudded once slow and heavy. The quiet life I had rebuilt trembled around the edges. I didn't open the message. Not yet. I just stared at those words, feeling the familiar tug of obligation clash with the newer, stronger instinct to protect myself. This was how everything had always begun, with a crisis, a plea, a carefully crafted hook designed to pull me back in. Only this time, I wasn't the same Karen they believed would always return. For 2 weeks, I didn't open Claire's message. I didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it, didn't let myself slip back into the familiar panic that used to hit me whenever my family said the words, "It's about Mom." Instead, I watched. I observed. I gathered information, the way someone studies weather patterns before a storm. Because if there was one thing I'd finally learned, it was this: my family never reached out unless they wanted something, and their emergencies had a way of becoming my burdens. During that time, their social media painted an entirely different picture than the panic embedded in Claire's message. Mom began posting photos of herself volunteering at a local charity, smiling beside donation bins, hugging children, making inspirational captions about giving back. Claire commented under every post with over-the-top praise, as if performing the role of the proud daughter in front of a digital audience. Dad stayed mostly silent online, but his absence always said more than his presence. But buried in those curated images were inconsistencies. Mom claimed she was volunteering full-time, yet she repeatedly checked in at hair salons and brunch spots on weekdays. Claire bragged about supporting Mom every step of the way, yet she was constantly posting photos with friends at events across the city. It didn't take long to notice the gaps between their stories and their reality. I began documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, copies of posts, inconsistencies in their narratives, not with the intention of destroying them, but to protect myself. After everything they had done, from financial theft to attempted workplace sabotage, I finally understood that evidence was the only language they couldn't twist. One day I received an email from the charity Mom claimed to be heavily involved with. It was a general newsletter, automated, nothing personalized. But in the list of volunteer acknowledgments, her name was missing. Yet she had just posted a photo 2 hours earlier with the caption, "So grateful to be recognized today." That was when something shifted from passive observation to quiet strategy. I reached out to a coworker, Sasha, the one who had stood by me during the HR mess, and asked if she could help me look into charity oversight regulations. She didn't ask why. She trusted my instincts. Another acquaintance, someone I'd met years ago at a financial seminar, gave me insight into how donor audits work. And Daniel, a former colleague with a knack for digital forensics, explained how public records could be verified against reported activities. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Not a vengeful picture, just a factual one. Mom wasn't the charitable saint she pretended to be. Claire wasn't her devoted caretaker. And the story they were telling the world was built on cracks. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside of me, so I wouldn't be labeled dramatic or jealous the moment I tried to defend myself. The opportunity to act came sooner than I expected. A local journalist posted a call for community stories, anything related to volunteer initiatives or charity misuse. It was the kind of invitation people usually scroll past. But this time I didn't scroll. I drafted a concise, factual email with the documentation I had gathered and sent it anonymously. I included screenshots, date inconsistencies, and a list of verifiable discrepancies. There was no bitterness in the wording, no emotional commentary, just evidence. 2 weeks later, the story broke. The article highlighted mismanagement within several community charity groups, including the one Mom had claimed to volunteer for. It raised questions about falsified hours, misreported donations, and volunteers exaggerating their roles for public recognition. Mom wasn't named directly, but the details were unmistakably clear to anyone who had seen her posts. Within hours, her carefully crafted online persona began to crack. Comments appeared under her photos asking for clarification. Friends messaged her publicly and privately. People who had praised her just days ago now tiptoed around the possibility of dishonesty. Claire reacted exactly as I expected. She scrambled to defend Mom online, posting tearful stories about hurtful accusations, implying that outsiders were trying to tear down a good woman. But the more she posted, the more questions she attracted. Some comments simply asked for proof. Others noted that Claire's timeline didn't match the volunteer narrative she had been selling. My family wasn't being exposed dramatically. They were being confronted gently by the truth. The facade they had relied on for years began to crumble, not because of me, but because it couldn't withstand its own weight. Days later, Dad's reputation took a hit when a community forum post brought attention to the lump sum car payment he had made for Claire. Someone recognized the payment as coming from the inheritance fund he'd publicly sworn to use only for emergencies affecting the whole family. Suddenly, whispers of favoritism and financial mismanagement circulated around him too. For once, I didn't feel guilty watching it happen. They created the circumstances. They made the choices. All I did was stop shielding them from the consequences. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Mom reached out. Not with a phone call, she knew I wouldn't answer, but with a request to meet in person. Against my better judgment, curiosity won out. I agreed to meet her at a cafe near my new apartment. She arrived looking smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. Her usual confidence was replaced with a strained tightness around her eyes. When she sat down, she exhaled like someone preparing for a performance. "Karen," she began, "you've made things very difficult." I didn't say anything. I didn't rescue her from the silence. She continued, "People are asking questions. They're saying hurtful things. I never thought you'd stoop to something like this." I waited, let her talk. Then she said the phrase that proved she still didn't understand anything. "If you wanted attention, you could have just told us." A heat rose in my chest, but I held my voice steady. "You stole from me," I said, "and you lied. And when I tried to set boundaries, you tried to ruin my job. This isn't about attention. It's about consequences." Her expression crumpled for a second, then hardened again. "You're twisting things." "No," I said for the first time, "I'm not." For a moment, she didn't speak. She stared at me like she was looking at a stranger, and maybe she was. The version of me who sat across from her wasn't the daughter who fixed everything. She wasn't the Karen who paid bills quietly or absorbed insults with a smile. She wasn't the person who would be guilted into coming home with an apology. She was someone new, someone she didn't know how to manipulate. Mom eventually stood muttering, "You'll regret this," and walked out of the cafe without looking back. But I didn't regret it, not for a second. Over the following weeks, the consequences continued unfolding. The charity launched a formal audit. Claire's credibility with her social circle wavered. Dad withdrew almost completely from public involvement. My family's world didn't catastrophically collapse, but the cracks they had ignored for years became impossible to hide. Meanwhile, my life grew fuller. My design studio gained new clients. My schedule stabilized. I slept through the night without waking up in a panic. The constant dread, the pressure of waiting for the next crisis finally loosened. One evening, as I cleaned out my files, I came across the old cosign agreement for Claire's car. The contract that tied me financially to her irresponsibility for 3 years. I fed it through my shredder slowly, piece by piece, watching the paper vanish into thin strips. It was symbolic, but symbolism matters. Because shredding that paper wasn't just releasing a debt, it was releasing the version of myself who tolerated what she didn't deserve. I thought that was the end of everything. I was wrong. Just when the dust began to settle, just when the quiet finally felt peaceful instead of hollow, Claire reached out again. This time she didn't message me. She showed up. And that was when everything truly began to unravel. I wasn't home when Claire first showed up. My building had recently installed security cameras in the hallways, and when I got the notification on my phone that motion had been detected outside my door, I assumed it was a package. Instead, when I opened the video feed, I saw Claire standing there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes swollen from what looked like hours of crying makeup smeared in streaks down her cheeks. She looked younger than I remembered, not in a physical way, but in the posture of someone who'd run out of places to hide. She knocked. Once, twice, then a third time. "Karen, I know you're in there." Her voice broke in the middle of my name. But I wasn't home, and even if I had been, I wouldn't have opened the door. Not yet. When she finally gave up and left, I stayed in my car outside the building for a long time, watching the door she had disappeared through. My heart wasn't racing the way it used to whenever Claire cried. It didn't pull me back toward her out of instinct or guilt. Instead, there was a quiet, steady ache, familiar but no longer controlling. I waited until I was sure she was gone before going upstairs. She had left a note on my welcome mat, just one sentence. "Please don't ignore me. I don't know what to do." I didn't pick it up right away. I stood above it, staring, debating whether the message came from genuine desperation or practiced manipulation. With Claire, the line had always been blurry, but eventually I picked it up and tucked it inside, not because I felt compelled to respond, but because I wanted to know exactly where the next step of this unfolding mess would land. For the next 3 days, I avoided contacting her. I buried myself in work, my new role, and the growing number of clients for my design studio. I filled my schedule so completely that there wasn't space for spiraling thoughts or emotional debris. And it worked mostly. The momentum of my new life carried me through, letting me feel, if only for moments, like the past few months had finally loosened their grip. But silence has a gravitational pull. It draws people toward it, either because they're terrified of it or because they need to fill it. Claire was the former. So when she appeared again this time, waiting by the entrance of my building, I knew she wasn't going to disappear with a polite knock. When I approached, she stepped forward quickly. "Karen," she said, voice thin, "can we please talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I unlocked the door and held it open not for her, but because I wasn't going to have this conversation outside where neighbors could overhear. She took the gesture as permission and followed me up the stairs. Inside, she hovered awkwardly near my kitchen counter, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Her usual polished confidence was nowhere to be found. "What's going on?" I finally asked. Claire looked down at her hands, then back up at me, with eyes swimming in exhaustion. "It's Mom," she whispered. "She's not doing well." I didn't react, not outwardly. I had learned long ago that reacting gave my family too much leverage. "What do you mean?" Claire swallowed. "After the audit started, everything got worse. People talk, Karen. They're saying awful things. Dad's stressed all the time. Mom barely leaves the house except for appointments. And she's been sick." "Sick how?" Her voice cracked. "Stress. Anxiety. She's barely eating. She's convinced the whole neighborhood is judging her." I held her gaze. "Is she sick or is she embarrassed?" Claire flinched. "Why are you being like this?" "Because I said calmly, the last time you messaged me saying it was about Mom, you tried to sabotage my job." She looked genuinely wounded for a moment. That wasn't me. The denial came too quickly, too instinctively, and my silence told her I didn't believe it. She exhaled, shakily dropping the lie. "Fine, I messed up. But things are different now. I need you." There it was, the line that had always been my undoing. I need you. Those 3 words had been the doorway through which my family stepped into my life over and over again, each time taking something on their way out. I braced myself. "And what exactly do you need?" I asked. Claire hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mom thinks someone is targeting her. She thinks people are spreading rumors, feeding information to reporters tipping off the charity board. She thinks it's you." I didn't move. "Is it?" My voice was steady, calm enough to make Claire's breath catch. She stared at me, speechless. For a moment, I saw something unfamiliar in her eyes, fear maybe, or realization. A flicker of understanding that she had never seen this version of me. "Karen," she whispered, "you didn't, did you?" "I didn't lie," I said. "I didn't invent anything, and I didn't do anything illegal. I simply stopped protecting her from the truth. What she posted publicly contradicted itself. Anyone could have seen it." Her face crumpled. "She's scared. She thinks everyone hates her." "She built the spotlight," I replied. "She can't be shocked that people are finally looking at her." Claire sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I just want this to stop." For the first time in years, I saw the weight she carried, not the weight she claimed, but the weight she earned. The consequences she had never faced before, Without my financial safety net, without my quiet interventions, without my willingness to absorb blame so she didn't have to, her world had become something she couldn't control. "Claire," I said gently, "I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I'm done being your solution." She looked up, eyes red and desperate. "So you won't help?" I paused, not because I doubted myself, but because in that moment I saw the truth. Helping them had never been help. It was enabling. It was permission for them to keep hurting me. "I'm not stepping back into that role," I said. "If Mom wants to talk to me, really talk, she can apologize. She can acknowledge what she did. But I'm not fixing her public image. I'm not cleaning up what she created. And I'm not sacrificing myself again." Claire let out a trembling breath, one that seemed to deflate her entirely. "I don't know what to do without you." "You'll figure it out," I said softly. "You were always capable. You just never had to be." She stayed a little longer, asking questions I didn't answer, searching for a version of me that no longer existed. When she finally left, she turned at the door and whispered, "I wish you weren't so angry." I shook my head. "I'm not angry anymore. That's what scares you." The door clicked shut behind her, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something important. They hadn't expected me to change. They believed the old Karen still lived inside me, the one who broke herself to keep them whole. But she was gone. And the woman standing in her place was no longer someone they could use guilt or twist. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply, without interruption, without dread, without waiting for the next crisis to crash through my phone. But the peace wouldn't last, because the fallout had only just begun, and the next message I received would be the one that shattered everything I thought I had prepared myself for. The next message didn't come from Claire. It didn't come from Mom either. It came from an unknown number one I didn't recognize, one with no contact name, no hint, nothing familiar about it, except for the sense of dread that crawled up my spine the moment I saw the preview. "This is about your mother. Call me back immediately." No punctuation, no introduction, no explanation, just urgency. For several minutes, I stared at the notification without opening it. I'd learned to be cautious. I'd learned that panic was the exact emotion they relied on to pull me back in, to undo months of boundaries, to turn me into the problem solver they had always depended on. But something about the message felt different. It wasn't dramatic like Claire's notes or guilt-heavy like Mom's voicemails. It was clinical, cold, purposeful. It didn't try to manipulate me emotionally, it was simply a command. And that was somehow worse. I didn't call back. Instead, I Googled the number. Nothing. No listings, no business, no social media. Just a blank space where information should have been. My heart began to beat faster, not because I feared for my mother, but because ambiguity had always been the thing that dismantled my confidence the fastest. I paced my apartment for a full 10 minutes before finally giving in and calling the number back. The line clicked after one ring. "Is this Karen Marino?" a man's voice asked. Calm, professional. "Yes," I said slowly. "This is Dr. Halperin from Westbridge Medical Center. Your mother has been admitted." Time slowed. Not dramatically, not like in movies where everything goes silent, but in a cold, detached way, where the air feels thick and your thoughts become heavier than your body. "What happened?" My voice came out steady to my surprise. "She collapsed during an appointment earlier today. We've run preliminary tests, but she's refusing certain evaluations until you arrive." I blinked. "Why me?" "She insisted you were her emergency contact." My jaw clenched. Of course she had. They ignored me until they needed me. Then suddenly I was the most important name on every form. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. "Is she stable?" "For now," he said. "But she's extremely anxious and agitated. We believe stress may be a significant factor." Stress, of course. The same woman who had spent decades shoveling stress onto me had finally buckled under the weight of her own. "I'll come," I said, even though a part of me didn't want to. Even though another part whispered that this was another cycle beginning the trapdoor beneath the role they'd always forced me into. When I arrived at the hospital, the waiting room lights felt too bright, too sterile. The antiseptic smell hit me instantly, pulling memories from years ago when Claire broke her arm, and I spent the entire night pacing beside her bed while Mom dramatized the story to relatives over the phone. This time, Claire was the one pacing. She looked up the moment she saw me, eyes red, shoulders hunched, the picture of a scared daughter. For the first time since this war between us began, she didn't try to act composed. "Karen. Just my name. No accusation, no false sweetness." I nodded but didn't reach for her. "Where is she?" Claire swallowed hard and pointed down the hall. Mom was in a private room, sitting upright on the bed, arms crossed tightly over her chest. When she saw me, her expression flickered some mix of relief, defensiveness, and something almost childlike. Vulnerability wasn't a place she visited often, and even now, she seemed uncomfortable showing it. "You came," she whispered. I stayed near the doorway. "You listed me as your emergency contact." She tried to smile, but the corners of her lips trembled. I didn't know who else to put. Dad wasn't there. Aunt Linda wasn't there. Her golden girl wasn't enough. For a moment, the silence between us felt too heavy to breathe in. Then she spoke again, voice tight. "Everyone thinks I'm a liar." I didn't respond. "People are talking about me, about the charity, about the money. I hear things everywhere I go." Her voice cracked. "They're saying I use donations for myself." "Did you?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flashed not with anger, but with fear. I didn't mean to misreport anything. I didn't know the rules. And the bank transfers, they were just temporary solutions. I was going to fix everything. "You stole from me." "I didn't," she snapped, then lowered her voice when the heart monitor beeped faster. "I borrowed it." "You left the account open, Karen. You always take care of things." I thought that I would handle it. I finished. Like always. Her chin trembled. I was scared. I didn't know where else to turn. "Everyone thinks I'm the villain." I crossed my arms. "You're not the villain, Mom. But you're not the victim either." Her eyes filled, and for a moment she looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't realize how much I relied on you until you left." "That's the problem," I said gently. "You relied, you expected, you took, and when I finally said no, you punished me." A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't know what else to do. For the first time in my life, she wasn't defensive. She wasn't dismissive or belittling. She wasn't constructing a narrative that made her look like the martyr. She was simply human. Flawed, scared, overwhelmed by the consequences she'd never prepared herself to face. "Karen," she said softly, "I'm sorry." The apology stunned me, not because I thought she couldn't say it, but because I never expected to hear it sincerely. I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, letting the words settle in the space between us. After a long moment, she whispered, "I don't know how to fix any of this." "You start," I said, "by not expecting me to fix it for you." She nodded slow and small, as if the weight of that truth finally made sense. Outside the room, Claire leaned against the wall, listening. When I stepped out, she didn't jump into excuses or tears. She just looked at me with a weary understanding. "Is she okay?" "She will be," I said, "but things need to change." Claire nodded. "I know." We walked down the hallway in silence. For once, the silence between us didn't feel like a threat or a punishment. It felt like acknowledgement. My family wasn't magically healed. Old patterns don't vanish in a single moment, but something had cracked open a layer of truth they could no longer deny, a shift in the foundation they had stood on for years. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I realized something important. I wasn't going back to who I had been, and they weren't going back to who they thought I was. For the first time, the cycle had broken, and so had I, just enough to finally rebuild.